I'll start this one. I would say be a joyful, loving, compassionate vegan. Bottom line, the best thing that you can do for the animals, for the planet. Um, I think that's about as straightforward and easy an answer as we can give, but for my own personal perspective. So just live vegan.
I can go next. I think it's obvious to me that it needs to be grassroots, bottom up with respect to glyphosate. I think that's a very powerful weapon. And so anybody who becomes aware by listening to people like me who are informing them about the toxicity of glyphosate and the importance of eating certified organic, not just for the glyphosate, because there's lots of other chemicals in the food as well. Learn to eat organically and then buy organic. When you go to the grocery store, always look for the certified organic label. Tell your children, tell your parents, tell all your family, all your friends, you're doing this, and tell them why you're doing it, and ask them to, watch something that like Secret Ingredients, which is a great movie that shows how a family switched over to certified organic and everybody got well. Listen to Jeffrey Smith. I mean, I think people need to find out that there's a serious problem here with glyphosate, and then they need to act on it locally. And I think you can, as I mentioned before, you can have a lot of influence, I think, at the government level locally, but you will have, I really admire the people who are going to the federal government and trying to speak about this, because that is so difficult and such a struggle, and it's very hard. I mean, I think if you have the stomach for it, do that. But I think a lot can happen at the local level, and the local level still has power. And then, cities start banning glyphosate. Mexico has banned glyphosate, and I think that's a huge signal to the United States. And in fact, the US is now worried that they're going to ban our imported food because it's contaminated with glyphosate. I hope they do. I mean, I think that if other governments start acting on glyphosate, eventually, I mean, the US government is deaf. I mean, they're really deaf on this topic. But I can't imagine they can't finally hear. And of course, there's all these lawsuits too. And right now there's a tremendous mess with respect to these non-Hodgkin's lymphoma lawsuits for glyphosate. That's been amazing. I was so stunned and so pleased when that first lawsuit, Dwayne Johnson using glyphosate in schoolyards, that was his job, his only chemical he was exposed to, young father of young children, 40 years old and dying of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I met him personally, and he's just a great guy. And he broke through the barrier that Monsanto was so proud that they always win the lawsuits. And now there's been just a tidal wave. There's like tens of thousands, I think, of lawsuits just on that one topic alone, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and glyphosate. So I'm really hoping that, I mean, for example, if it can be shown with enough evidence that glyphosate causes autism, which I believe it does. And in my talk tomorrow, we'll talk quite a bit about autism and exactly how glyphosate could be causing it. If someone wins a lawsuit on glyphosate and autism, that will also open up a floodgate. So I'm hoping that the lawsuits may be the downfall for that one chemical. And then, of course, the worry is they'll just substitute glyphosate or 2,4-D. I mean, there are plenty of other herbicides out there that are equally toxic. They need to get the bigger message that you've got to go certified organic in order to have healthy food, in order to have a healthy population, and also in order to have a healthy earth. Because I think glyphosate is a unrecognized, unappreciated contributor to global climate change. It actually blocks an enzyme in the plants that converts carbon dioxide into organic matter. And one of the ways that we can fight climate change is by just having the crops take the carbon out of the air, put it into the soil. And we're blocking that with glyphosate. And of course, we're getting all this runoff of nitrate and phosphate fertilizers because glyphosate is making the soil very erosive. We're losing the topsoil. It's ruining the soil. Someone mentioned the soil is so important. Healthy gut, healthy soil. And we really need to start with the soil to get the soil healthy by nourishing it, by getting rid of the chemicals, using natural, as fertilizers. All of that needs to happen. We need a revolution in food. And there are many people who are working on that problem and learning how to grow organically, efficiently, and with cost effective. I hope we're going to have a real revolution in food, really going back to the methods we used to use with the small family farms. It's sort of a romantic notion on my part. I think that being a small family farmer is actually pretty cool. And so I'm hoping that, youngsters will start to think in terms of that as a possible pathway for their profession. So we definitely need a major overhaul of the food system. And of course, it also goes with the medical system as well. Natural for the food, natural for the medicines. It all goes together. And hopefully we're getting that message across, despite all the censorship.
So we need a revolution in technology as well. And the only way to do that is what has been talked about here, which is getting involved and speaking out, not being silent about this, educating your family members, taking a step forward. I know when I talk about technology, a lot of people who are, they've got clean water and they're cleaning up their food. And this is just like, ugh. No, not that, and we have to go here and address technology. So I would say be fearless and start speaking up to your elected officials. There are local groups working on wireless safety around the world. Certainly in the United States, in every state, there's a smart meter group or a 5G group. And getting involved is the way to fix this, I do believe, from the bottom up and then also from the top down. So addressing your elected officials and asking them to be accountable. Don't put the phone to your head. I mean, we have to protect the children. So I know that the CDC reported, that lymphoma is increasing. Cancer is increasing in our kids among all the other issues we've talked about related to ADHD and so forth. And I worked in an ADHD clinic for a long time, but when I first started out as a social worker, I remember my first child that I worked with ADHD. And I remember it was like, oh, what's that?
Mm-hmm.
And now the whole, there I was working at an ADHD clinic with all of these kids. It was like half the class or more in schools when I ended up working in a school. So now's the time. Thank you.
And I think, I think the one thing I would say is that we need to set an example. I think it's one of the most powerful tools any individual has, is to set an example of kindness and compassion and of living a plant-based or vegan life that is joyful, as Hope said, and to share food. Share food at your work, with your neighbors. I think for a lot of people, there's a fear of, losing the food that they love. And if they can be exposed to food that's absolutely delicious, then that, it makes it a little easier for them. So yeah, I won't go on too much.
I would echo that too, Brenda, and Hope. It's all about being a lighthouse. I like to say, be a lighthouse, not a tugboat. And if you're joyful and you get excited to talk about plants, like we get so excited to talk about it, and people are like, what is she on? I want some of that, And you have that energy because we're so excited about it and passionate and positive, as opposed to judging and I just think that light is the best thing you could do, because after that, then everyone else wants to know, and then you can inspire, and definitely with the food, because you win people over with their palate for sure. And so, yep, just inspiring and positive and be the best that you can.
It makes me think of a story from Florida, because Florida has this beautiful Everglades that brings all the carbon dioxide, and it's like our water source. And what happened in the 1950s, we drained because we wanted to build up, and we kept draining it. And then finally, of course, we had started an airport in Miami, and then suddenly they wanted a new airport all the way in the Everglades. And one of the engineers that was a big part of that, he said, what on earth are we doing? And he went to the governor that had approved this. And he told him everything, what was happening and how we were going to lose. And we were not going to have water. This is our water source. And he said, how come nobody told me this before? Of course, so he stopped the project. So the Everglades still could exist. And of course, a lot have been drained. I mean, I'm in Florida here. A lot have been drained. that was a natural paradise, of course. So, but this happens because the people up in decision positions might not be educated at all about what they have around them. And if there is any way that we could remind them, of course we should. I still think that, yes, it's be an example, be the example you want, what you wanted to see, right? Tell your friends, but be the example. And that's, you know, we are all into that herd and herd immunity, herd followers, and people needs leaders that make sense. Just like that engineer, everybody said, oh, of course, you're right. And I think all of us are doing our job really in the same compassionate, passionate way. And whatever we can do, you know, maybe we should do more of this and try to educate people, especially women. I always talk to women a lot because we are the ones that can shape our community. I think even more than men, because we are the nurturers, we are the mothers. And if anybody should care about future, it should be us. And, you know, I know, of course, my husband and so many men here that work with us are totally compassionate and passionate about future, but we can shape it. That's our tool, and we got to take it.
I think my message to everybody is this issue of you have to be informed about issues, and you cannot any longer, we cannot live in a world anymore where we just put our head in the sand and hope that somebody's going to take care of things for us. And I'll just share a couple of things that I've learned from my experience. You know, we talk a lot about the American public. They don't want to do better for themselves. They just want to take a pill and this and that. And there's an element of people who I think that way. But what we found, when we were able to do on-site employer plans, one of the criteria that we would set, and I think this is really hopeful, what I'm going to tell you, is we wanted 3 one-hour sessions with every employee to talk about what we do and health from our perspective, and then they could make their decision about whether or not they wanted to enroll in our program. And what was very interesting, we're talking about people being forced to listen to us for 3 hours against their will on company time. And when we would talk to people about there's no such thing as a chemical imbalance in the brain. So if you're being drugged for a psychological condition, that's ridiculous. Okay, here's why. That diabetes type 2 can be reversed in a matter of a few weeks if you eat the right diet. So we talk about all these different kinds of things. You know, the images don't really tell you much in an orthopedic office. We would have a 65% enrollment rate within a few weeks after those talks. And I think that speaks to the fact that if people are given good information, it's objective and it's presented in a way that's factual, they do act on it. So what we're suffering from is, how do we get this messaging, everything that we're all talking about, how do we get this in front of people so that they can make the right decision? Because it's astounding how many people will. And then I'll tell you about my mother, who was a very educated person, owned her own business, became a millionaire in her own right, and died probably 20 years younger than she should have, because she drank the medical Kool-Aid and got sucked into the medical mill. And she had surgeries that she shouldn't have had. And the last 10 years of her life, I wouldn't have wished on anybody, all right? But I will tell you this, if a person in a white coat had said to my mother, there will be no more surgeries, I won't do them, and I'm not prescribing any more drugs, you need to change your diet, stop smoking, get up, walk around. In a white coat, she would have listened, all right? Unfortunately, I don't wear a white coat. She didn't listen to me. It's hard to be a prophet in your own land, right? But I think that's an example of, we've got to change the system, because as long as most of the people in this country, that the information that they're getting is from traditionally trained doctors who are trained by drug companies and others. I'm not present company excluded. I mean, you know, obviously anybody coming to this forum is going to be a different kind of health professional, but we have got to find a way to get this messaging out to the public so that they become more discerning consumers. Because how is it that a person with my mother's intellect and background could be sucked into this? It's because there was no opposing opinion then. And it's gotten worse, as we're seeing right now. So I guess the last thing that I would say, I love the things that you guys said about leading by example, because that's part of it. And I think part of our messaging has to be, and I've been talking about this for years, that every time we make a decision to do something, we're voting by being present for it, and we're voting with our checkbook. So I tell people to think about this, and I think, Hope, you'll like this. You know, when you buy regular eggs at the store, you just go into the store and say, my family likes eggs, I'm going to buy eggs. What you're really saying is, I like water pollution, I like air pollution, I like having flies that are so dense around these barns and places where they have all these chickens that the kids can't go to school. That actually happened east of us here. They had to close schools down because of the flies and that sort of thing. I think it's great to eat food that's laced with antibiotics and steroids and hormones. And I feel so strongly about what a good idea this is that I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to help finance it. Now that's a perspective. I don't think people think about that. They're just thinking, I like eggs, right? But these kinds of decisions get made every day in a mindless kind of way. And so I think as we're living our lives and trying to show people what the alternative to today is, I think we have to insert that by saying, look, it isn't just that I do what I do to be healthy. I do what I do because how I spend my money and how I spend my time says a lot about what I think is right to do. And I don't mean that in a you should do what I do sort of way. I mean it in a I thought about this consciously and made a decision. And you could think about it consciously and make a different decision. And I understand that. But the consciously thing is what we have to work on.